Welcome to the Soldevello Communication Awareness Training video. Over the course of the video, we will be looking at specific things to do, things to be aware of, and why you should be aware of them when it comes to communication and the tasks you perform at work. We've divided the training into 4 modules. The first module is emails, the second is meetings, the third is tickets, and the last module is proactive communication. So now that I've presented an outline of the video, I'd like to give a bit of an introduction to the content by saying that communication is a habit. Things you do or don't do while using any channel of communication are things that typically happen over and over, like someone who loves to talk, or on the opposite side, someone who barely talks at all. Throughout these videos, I'm going to show you examples of common communication failures, such as, in this section, not including a title when sending a meeting invitation, or not adding an appropriate agenda. While these things can happen for different reasons, it's important to recognize if you do any of them regularly, because awareness of a habit is key to dropping it. Of course, actually changing it requires action, and unless you take that action, the habit will continue no matter how much awareness you gain. Let's move on to our first section, invitations and event creation. What you're looking at now is the event creation screen in Google Calendar. You may already be familiar with it, but if not, I'm going to go through the areas to be aware of and discuss some mishaps that occur, or failures as we've called them and as I've mentioned, as well as the requirements in setting up meetings using this tool. The first thing I'd like to mention is the necessity of setting up and sending invitations to a meeting, as well as accepting invitations that you receive. 2 common failures are not doing those things, so not using Google Calendar to create an event, and only informally scheduling a meeting, as well as not accepting invitations that you receive. While it may seem obvious that you and other participants know about the meeting and will be attending it, making these things official is not only a requirement, but a professional courtesy you show to the people you work with, whether they're clients or colleagues. Doing these types of things creates the recognition that you are able to handle all your responsibilities, no matter what they are. Moving on to the page itself. If you give it a quick look, you'll see that most of the areas are self-explanatory. Starting at the top, you can see a long gray box where you set the title of the meeting. One of the failures is that either a title doesn't get included or an unclear one is used. An example would be using the word meeting as a title, or something that is overly general. The idea is to use an appropriate title, one that specifies clearly what the meeting is about. So if you're going to have a meeting to discuss feedback on Project X, for example, rather than using something like feedback as a title, you could use what I just mentioned, discuss feedback on Project X, or something similar. You want to leave the participants with no doubt as to what the subject of the meeting is. Just underneath the Add Title box, we have the date and time boxes. If you attend meetings with people who are in a different time zone, it's important that you set the time appropriately. While Google Calendar automatically changes it based on the participant's time zone, you have to remember to set the time you are available to meet at while keeping in mind what time that would be for the participant. For example, the west coast of the United States is 9 hours behind Poland. So if you're having a meeting with someone who's based there, 8 a.m. for them is 5 p.m. for you. Being aware in this way allows you to avoid the situation where you have to message or email each other again, and maybe even again, to determine an appropriate time to meet. If you're setting up a weekly meeting, or one that takes place at any other regular interval, you will also be using the next box down, whose default setting is Does Not Repeat. As you can see in the drop-down menu that appears when you click this box, you can customize the interval to fit your needs. The next box we're going to look at is the Add Location box. You use this box to reserve the room in which your meeting will take place. First, click on the Rooms tab, located next to the Guests tab on the right-hand side of the screen. Looking at the second box underneath these tabs, make sure that it says Available Rooms Only. Then choose the desired room from the list that appears under that box. Your chosen room will then appear in the Add Location box. One of the failures here is leaving the Add Location box empty so that there's no room booked officially. This can lead to some difficulties, the worst being that someone else reserves the room you were thinking of using, but didn't actually book, so that having your meeting becomes more of a challenge than it should. It is thus very important to make sure this box contains the name of the room where you intend to hold the meeting. Depending on the situation and room availability, you should also consider booking a room and holding your meeting in that room, of course, even if it's online and only you are participating. This is to ensure that you will not be interrupted, as well as not interrupting anyone you might share an office or office space with. Continuing downward one step from the Add Location box, it is important to set the meeting software here in the Add Conferencing box. It should be clear to all participants on how to join the meeting, and this is achieved by defining which program you will be using because it adds a link in the window that pops up when someone clicks on the meeting in their calendar, allowing them to join the meeting easily. The default software is Hangouts, so if you use something else, like Skype for example, it's important that you add this information to the agenda so everyone is clear on what you will be using. Going down to the default visibility box, the drop-down menu to the right appears when you click it. If you select the public option here, you allow non-participants of your meeting to see more details in the summary box of the event that can be viewed in the calendar section. These details include the title of the meeting, the list of invited guests, the agenda, and the room. By default, this box is set to private so that only the time, date, and organizer are visible. One reason you might set this box to public is simply as a courtesy to allow a colleague to see the room and the title of the meeting, in order to easily find out if it may have been canceled and the room can be booked by someone else. On to a very important aspect of event creation, including the agenda. Every meeting has one, and the larger gray box at the bottom of the page that by default contains the words Add Description is where you include it. Common failure is that there is no agenda given in this box when the event is created. It must be stressed that adding an agenda is a crucial requirement. Knowing what is to be discussed in a given meeting allows the meeting and its participants to be more efficient and productive. Whether the plan is to discuss a few different points or just one topic, including an agenda in this box is a must. Moving our attention again to the right-hand side, this time under the Guests tab, we find the last two requirements, adding guests and allowing them to modify the event. Common failure here is forgetting to add guests to the invitation. It goes without saying that you have to make sure to include all participants, so it's simply a matter of remembering to do so. The final thing to do is ensure that the Modify Event box is checked. A guest may wish to change the agenda for the meeting, for example, or their schedule may change, and they need to meet at a different time. Checking this box will allow them to make any necessary adjustments while at the same time notifying the rest of the participants of the change. With regards to setting the time and date of the meeting, if you have access to the other participants' calendars, it is easy and good practice to check their availability yourself in order to set these specifications. Next to the Event Details tab, you can see the Find a Time tab. By clicking on it, the meeting participants' schedules appear in the timetable underneath. You can look at either their daily or weekly schedules by setting the day/week box to the right in order to find an opening for your meeting. It is important to mention that not checking a guest's schedule when possible is a common failure. Setting a time for a meeting without confirming participants' availability can create scheduling conflicts, leading to more difficulties in trying to set the meeting up. Practice of checking someone's schedule becomes even more obvious when you take a look at this slide. What you see is a typical week for Jakub Słowinski. As you can tell, his availability is rather limited. This of course may be true for others you need to meet with as well, and unless you check their calendar, you won't know how busy they are. Also, you cannot predict how their schedule might change. These are two reasons that they need to actually receive an invitation to the meeting in order to confirm their availability and book that time into their schedule, as well as have the option to modify the event if needed. Finally, for the same two reasons I just mentioned, it is important that you create the event as far in advance as possible so that the guest has time to confirm and accept or suggest an alternative. When everything is completed and ready, this is an example of how it will look. Set it all up, there's one thing left to do. Actually send the invitations. After clicking the Save button at the top of the screen, hit the Send button in the pop-up so that all the participants receive notifications of the upcoming meeting. As I mentioned at the beginning, besides sending invitations, remember that it is important to also reply to the invitations you receive. Of course, you can check out all your events in your event calendar. Going to a specific event, as indicated by the arrow on the right-hand side of the screen, and clicking it, you'll see its details pop up in the middle of the screen. The final step is to click one of the three options indicated by the arrows near the bottom of the screen. Of course, you'll also find these choices in the invitation email you received regarding the event, and can reply that way. Regardless of how you do it, it's important to reply to an invitation by choosing one of these options because naturally, the organizer wants to know how many people to expect. So if you know you're going to be there, you want to let them know. If you're not going to be there, you want to let them know. Even if for some reason you have to click the maybe button, it's better to let the organizer know that you might be there than to simply not reply at all. Now let's go through a summary of the requirements for this section. Create an event and send the invitation. If you're available for the meeting, accept the invitation. When creating an event, include an appropriate title. Choose the time, being aware of any time zone difference. Use the repeat button when appropriate. Book a room. Set the meeting software. Include the agenda. Add guests to the invitation. Allow guests to modify the event. Check guests' calendars for availability whenever possible. And create the event in advance. The final thing I'd like to talk about is being professional. Taking care of the requirements that were discussed in this section shows awareness of and consideration towards the people you interact with. It shows that you are able to handle your responsibilities fully. These things are what professionalism is all about. You demonstrate competence and skill in what you do and how you do it. This is important because it gives others the impression that you truly understand the things you are responsible for, and that you can be trusted to perform your job with a high level of quality. You'll notice that the goal of being professional is a common theme among the rest of these sections in these videos because it is a common goal to aim for in any workplace.